We're going to dive right into scripture here. We're going to read this verse together, and then we're going to discuss our observations as a group, and then we'll come back and share those observations in just a moment. It says this: suppose you have a friend who comes to you in the middle of the night and says to you, "Friend, lend me 3 loaves. For a friend of mine on a trip has just shown up, and I have nothing to offer him." And suppose you reply, "Stop bothering me. The door is already locked and my children are in bed. I can't get up to give you anything." I'm telling you, even though you won't get up and give him anything out of friendship, you will get up and give him whatever he needs because of his shameless behavior. Who among you would hand a son a stone when he's asking for bread? Again, who would hand him a snake when he's asking for fish? Of course, no one would. So if you, worthless as you are, know how to give your children good gifts, isn't it much more likely that your Father in heaven will give good things to those who ask him? So take a moment, discuss those passages, and we'll share those thoughts with one another in just a moment, and then we'll take a deeper dive into this text. All right, I hate to interrupt, but I would love to hear what y'all talked about. Who wants to share with the rest of the community what was discussed in your groups?
We were kind of taken back by the worthless as you are. Like, that's rude. I mean, I agree with it based on the rest of it, but just the language itself is kind of rude. But like, we finally got it to it, like with like 30 seconds left, where we came up with something, right? Where it's like giving your kids, or giving a stone or a snake when they need something else is useless. So you not giving anything is useless. And then I feel less insulted by the useless as you are part, but like initially.
Well, and we all, I mean, the whole idea of like if you have something to share, and dude's already awake, because you know the whole if my door is already locked, I'm in bed. Well, you're awake, so you could help.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like in a general sense of just kind of our world situation of people who have access and something they could share with people who don't have enough, and yet that unwillingness because it might not, suit you, or is somehow an annoyance to the guest.
There's a quote that comes to my mind, and I don't remember who said it, but I remember the quote, and it's the coat in your closet belongs to the poor. The coat in the closet belongs to the poor, and it sticks out in my mind often. Shane Claiborne talked about that quote in his book, but I don't remember who said it. So I remember who quoted it, but not the original source. So I'm going to take 2 more. Yes.
To me, this verse has always kind of talked about how God's character is elevated above ours. So to me, it's like, if you as a human, worthless as you are, can give your children something to ask for, how much more like would God give you? And kind of speaking to that, he's not there to trick you. And then it's also just post in traditional, Jewish tradition of, it's like embarrassing to a household if a visitor comes and you have something to offer them. So having to go to your neighbor for that, or being pesky, which is like shameless behavior they're speaking about. But the moral of this has always been to me of saying, if humans are capable of doing good, how much greater is God doing good?
It's good, very good point. And remember, some of the early church were Gnostics, and they believed that life itself, if you were alive, you were broken, you were dirty, all of life in its entirety was worthless. I'm not sure if that's coming out here. The dissertation that I read on that did not isolate that verse. So I was speculating some of the same things, too, like maybe that's what it's getting at. Or I thought about like in Southern culture, it's this weird dynamic where you pick on people that you love. It's really weird, and it's just how it is. Like, I'm bald, and somebody that I'm close to is going to pick on my bald head, and that's just how it is. I don't know why. But you come out here and you kind of self-deprecate in humor, and people are like, "Don't talk about yourself like that." But everybody does it back home, so it's just different cultures. Now, in this opening passage, the author is utilizing as Gabriella pointed out, the shame and honor culture that was upheld in ancient Mediterranean society. And at first glance, it makes the reader assume that the person providing the food inevitably has a good conscience, and that will eventually self-motivate this person to do the right thing, because deep down he's a good person. Let me nip that fairy tale in the bud right now. If folks that had the means to provide for people that are struggling had good consciences, then Flint would have had clean water, Big Pharma would have been regulated, schools would be equally funded, the environment would be clean, forests would be preserved, reparations would have already been made, and poverty would have died a long time ago. But luckily, if we dig a little bit deeper into the historical context that the author lived in, we can see that this, in fact, was the exact point that the author was trying to make as well. Because according to the fellows with the Jesus Seminar, the shame and honor culture was paramount for social status, and shame was something that could have easily demolished someone in that ancient world. Now, why is that? Because there often were not written contracts that were utilized in this society, so many agreements depended on keeping your word, which is why there's a passage in the scripture that says, let your yes be yes, and your no be no. It is an ancient way of saying, keep your word, be honorable. Because back then, your word and your honor were literally everything. Also, we can look at the ceremonies found in ancient Judaic culture to see that when someone gave their word, it was taken very, very seriously. Oftentimes in ancient Hebrew culture, they would sacrifice animals and they would line a path with fragments of these animals' bodies. I know this is barbaric, but stay with me. And as they would recite a commitment to one another or a covenant, they would enter into a contract with someone, and they would recite it as they walked the path between the sacrificed animal parts. And the path, that line of dead animals with dismembered corpses everywhere, was a symbolic statement that basically said, if I don't follow through with things on my end of the contract, then let it be done to me what has been done to these animals. So this very serious ceremony was structured around the premise of trust and reputation. In such a culture where your word is your bond and trust is paramount, what do you think shame would do to your ability to enter into negotiations and contracts? What do you think? It would make it very difficult because nobody's going to trust you. You're not an honorable person, which means no one wants to make an agreement, aka covenant, with you. They may not want to have a contract with you to barter goods and or produce. Now, in contrast, being shamed this day and age means that you simply might lose a few Facebook friends. You simply might lose some Instagram followers, which, happens to me sometimes. But being shamed in the ancient world of modern-day Palestine meant that you may not be able to provide for you or even your entire tribe. So in short, shame in that time was a possible death sentence. Now, of course, this person got up in the middle of the night to provide for their neighbor in that kind of culture, because not doing so meant that they wouldn't just lose Instagram followers, but not providing for that neighbor in need did mean that they might lose the trust that people have in them in their community if word got out about their indifference to their neighbor's need. And this is where things get radical, as Jesus did. You see, here this guilt trip is being mobilized as a form of subversive manipulation. This is another example of nonviolent agitation utilized by the early church. And I love how the gospel talks about how to play dirty in the holiest way possible, right? How to fight without violence, how to destroy without burning, how to harm your enemy with love, right? It's a book of brilliant strategies when facing an enemy that could wipe you out on a whim. But the most important theme in today's passage is a willingness to do whatever it takes within the margins of nonviolent subversion to get done what needs to be done. Now, there's another similar verse the fellows at the Jesus Seminar connects to the one in today's text. And it says this. You've probably heard us talk about it before. It says, "Ask, it'll be given to you. Seek, you'll find. Knock, it'll be open for you. For everyone who asks, receives. Everyone who seeks, finds. And for the one who knocks, it will be opened." Now, of course, this statement has been a great marketing tool for folks like Joel Osteen. Jesus is your genie. You just have to believe you can be rich or have that car that you've always been wanting. You just have to believe and pray for it, and it's just going to be magically manifested for you. Name it and claim it. Just have faith. Put out the right vibes in the universe. Take your pick. It's all garbage theology, no matter what faith it's guzzied up in. You heard correct. And this is unusual for me. Christians are not the only spiritual leaders that weaponize this kind of rhetoric for their own gain. Folks like Marianne Williamson and Tony Robbins. I don't think Tony Robbins is a Christian in any way. They're not Christians, but they certainly regurgitate the same kind of nonsense. They just package it differently. Robbins says that the only things holding you back in this world are your own lack of ambition, your own lack of motivation. Williams says that the only things keeping your goals from manifesting are the thoughts that you are putting out into the universe. Now, none of these three share the same spiritual views, but there is one thing that they all have in common. They are all multimillionaires that have built their empire on the backs of the oppressed by giving them a false sense of empowerment with teachings that tell them to believe the right way if they want something in life. You just got to believe these things. You just got to put out the right vibes in the universe if you want these things. And the problem with that logic is that it fails to incorporate the systemic issues that are at play and levied against folks on the margins. Racism, sexism, transphobia, homophobia, xenophobia, fat phobia. These are all things that cannot be overcome simply with prayer and vibrations or crystals. They are systemic issues that must be confronted, that must be addressed, that must be discussed head on before we will ever see any kind of change. So pick your poison, and the point remains that Jesus, God, the universe, crystals, vibrations, whatever you're into, they're not genie bottles. I wish life worked that way, but it doesn't. It would be dope if it did, right? And how easy would it be to sell Christianity to people if Jesus worked like that, right? Like, you have an illness, a terminal disease. All right, just pray. We're going to lay hands on you, and we're going to pray for healing, and you just have to have enough faith, and you're going to be healed. Boom. I just got somebody coming to church every week, I guarantee you. You need lots of money? You want to be rich? Just pray for it and believe that Jesus wants you to be rich. Boom. I just got somebody coming to church and hopefully tithing 10% of that wealth. You want to look like Chris Pine or Idris Elba? Just believe, just pray. I've tried that one. It don't work, right? So going back to the beginning of my rabbit trail, it was more like a mountain lion trail. What do you think that Jesus is asking others to do when he tells them to knock, seek, and ask? He is telling them not to be afraid to challenge the way that things are. He is challenging them to seek a better way and to have faith that everything will work itself out if we seek, if we put hands and feet to our faith. Not just believe specific things, not just light some sage or emote specific feelings, but actually put legs to what we're seeking. Now, the second part of today's verse goes on to draw imagery from parenting. Now, let me ask you, church, and you can answer this out loud. If your kid's hungry, are you going to give them some salmon, or are you going to give them a rattlesnake to eat. Give them some salmon, right? So what the author is trying to stir in the hearts of the reader is a sense of hope and faith. It's a hope that despite what we're up against, these ancient people believe that all things will work for good if we have the courage to put legs to those initiatives, and if we're willing to stir the pot a little bit, as the person that was bugging the neighbor did in the first passage. Meaning, thoughts and prayers and vibrations are nice, but you cannot Care Bear stare a better world into creation, right? You have to physically seek out a brave new tomorrow. And within this passage, the author presents the belief that spirit, God, goddess, the universe, again, whatever language you choose, is on the side of the marginalized and the brutalized, the broken and the beaten, the poor and the lowly. This was a novel concept in the ancient world. And sadly, it's still a novel concept today in faith communities. But throughout scriptures, it contradicts this thought, right? Because Jesus was always on the side of the oppressed and the broken, and God was on the side of the oppressed and the broken. But throughout the empires that are mentioned in scriptures, Rome, Egypt, and Babylon, their pantheon of gods uplifted those that were in seats of authority over the rest of the populace. You see, in the minds of empire, the divine's favor rested on the powerful. That's why they're powerful. Their gods, or their God, put them there. And how often do you hear Christians say, well, we should respect Trump because God put him there? God did not put Trump there. The church put Trump there, and that's a problem, which is why I appreciated that song by Daniel. What's his last name again? Dietrich. That's why I appreciated that song so much. Yet here, in the scriptures, in the gospel, is this subversive rabbi that challenged this notion by saying that God's ear forever tips in favor of the meek and the downtrodden. And sadly, 2,000 years later, the church that Jesus started is preaching the polar opposite of these values. They are teaching that God's favor still rests with the powerful, whether they are ethical or not. And to me, and hopefully to you, that's a problem. Amen?
Amen.
All right, so discuss what we talked about in this section, and then we'll come back and share those thoughts. Hopefully you'll discuss how we can apply these truths today. I would love to hear how you think we can apply this in our day-to-day life. Be right back. So what did you all discuss? How can we apply this, or did you have any other observations that stood out to you? I would love to hear what you got. Yes?
We were just talking about Trump's background,
Mm-hmm.
and then I guess it was pretty traumatic and pretty awful.
Yeah.
So, part of you kind of say, maybe didn't have a chance, I don't know. I mean, yes and no.
Yeah. I mean,
You always can make choices and you're always better.
Yeah, I think there is some logic to say that we're all a product of our experiences. So if he's a monster, perhaps something monstrous happened to him. I think it is also possible, though, that the monstrous thing that happened to him is he was given so much prowess in society to believe that he's above everyone else, which is the problem with capitalism in its entirety, right? Like these people, and I use this term lightly because they do receive all the benefits in culture. In a way, they're kind of victims of a misguided mindset too, because they're robbed of being able to perceive an ethical life, right? Because they deserve to be at the top is kind of their mindset. We worked hard. My family earned this. And so many billionaires, like Trump, he's definitely a product of unbridled capitalism because he didn't work a day in his life for the wealth he was given. Like, I think he started a business with a small loan of $1 million from his parents. And that was decades ago. So $1 million back then was worth a lot more than today. So yes and no, I guess is how I would say that, potentially. Not sure if y'all agree, I'm just thinking out loud. Yes?
One of the observations I kind of made was, you're saying, like, not to give the stone for the fish or whatever, it's like, if someone's asking you for help, do what they're asking for.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's useless. Like,
That's a good point.
they're asking for food, and like, well, I can, give you a shirt. Like, yeah, that's nice, but that's not really what they're asking for.
So many missionaries, and this is such a stain on the common missionary practice. They go to these impoverished countries and they take Bible tracts and they're like, this is nice, but we can't cook this. Like, we're hungry. So, the church can learn from that too. Yes.
Bouncing off of what Valerie said, there's a thing I see even with people that are liberals or further left than that. They'll look and they'll see someone that's homeless as a sign saying that they need money, and then buy them a sandwich instead.
Mm-hmm.
Which implies, at least as far as I'm concerned, that these people don't know what they need.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard some people say, well, they're just going to buy booze or drugs. And I'm like, you do drugs and drink. Like, come on, they have just but yeah, I mean, that's a choice that people make. They're going to make it no matter if I give them money or not.
Mm-hmm.
So I might as well give them their own choice for it.
Mm-hmm.
So bouncing off of that.
There was a guy that was downtown Pacific a couple months ago, and he had a sign that said, I just need money for weed. And I thought it was funny, so I gave him $5. I was like, dude, you win the internet today, sir. And but what he told me is he does need money for weed because he medicates his pain, and he would much rather take that than pay a ton of money for prescriptions when he needs all the resources he can to survive on the streets. And it was a very fair point. It was a brilliant marketing tool, for one. Somebody needs to hire that dude. And two, it was also eye-opening for me, to let me know, yes, he might be using it for drugs because maybe he needs them. So good stuff. Any more? Yes, Bernie.
Kind of as a segue to your next series of studies on the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things about this passage is that it does suggest that there is some kind of divinely delivered reward for righteous behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've been sitting here kind of running through the New Testament, thinking, is there really any part of the New Testament that doesn't teach that?
Mm-hmm.
That right behavior ultimately gets a reward.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas that when you move to the Old Testament, not all of it, because that in the Proverbs,
Mm-hmm.
the idea that your righteous behavior rewards you with wealth
Mm-hmm.
is very much present.
Mm-hmm.
But in Ecclesiastes and Job, the idea that you have to be righteous without reward is more prominent in the Old Testament.
Yes.
And that, for those of you that were here for installment number 3,
Mm-hmm.
the last part of my series on the Old Testament, the idea that there was going to be divine reward did not get into the Old Testament until the very last book written.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that there was no reward for righteous behavior is the dominant theme through much of the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I just note, thinking about a transition from an emphasis on divine reward for righteousness that does tend to play out in the New Testament as you move into the Old Testament.
And you stole one of my points too, because I believe the divine is on the side of the poor and the marginalized. However, I don't necessarily know that we're going to see the fruits of that even in this lifetime, right? And I don't know that these ancient people saw evidence of that either, which is probably why the story changed, right? It was like, oh, for so long, do good and good things will happen. Well, we just got slaughtered by this guy, so maybe if we do better things will happen. No, he's still killing us. And I think you do what's right because it's right, in the hopes that this world will transition at some point, and you keep running the race. There was a Facebook quote from someone that said that justice is like a choir, because a choir can sustain a singular note for eternity, because different members of the choir can drop out as the other choir members sing. The other choir members that aren't singing can take a breath, and they can sustain that note for forever. And that's what seeking justice should be like. And I thought that was an awesome image. So let me skip down that part because Bernie made my point for me. All right. There we go. So Christians still believe, and this is what stood out to me, that God somehow placed the tyrant turd, aka Trump, in the White House. And on the left, now I'm going to pick on us too, I've met progressive Christians that think that Bloomberg's presence in the race is a good thing. And within both schools of thought, it's clear that humanity still believes that powerful means favorable, that financial prowess somehow equates to equity, that people that have somehow deserve more than people that have less. I mean, how broken have we become or remained to still adhere to such diabolical systems of belief? This week I got into a pretty heated debate with a fellow left-leaning minister of all people online, and he was spouting off about how socialism is anti-American and how it's not biblical. And me, being the patient man that I am, chose to listen and hold space for him and his friend. I'm just kidding, dude. I totally ate his lunch. That is a lie. I was ready with statistics and facts and verses while I was defending this outlandish idea that people deserve dignity. Healthcare. It's a human right. This outlandish idea that our value is not dependent on our level of productivity, and necessities like healthcare are human rights. So, side note, if you need proof that Jesus was for universal healthcare, in the Gospels, when Jesus healed people, he never asked if they were in his network or if they had a copay, right? He just healed them. Hashtag just saying. But after this heated exchange, what I realized is that both he and I we truly believed that social democracy is the most ethical approach to governance. Whether it was possible or not, that's where he and I disagreed. And that's why today's verse is so powerful, because many people agree that social democracy and universal health care, these are ethical things, but they disagree about whether or not they are possible. But here's the thing. We do not need to understand how justice will come. We just need to start walking the path towards it. The solutions will come. But if we never take the first step because we're hesitant to start the journey toward betterment, then of course things will never change. We have to believe enough in the finish line to at least start the damn race. And to be honest, the moment we take that first initial step, the more absurd those initial objections will become. But what about the economy? Y'all, who designed the economy? We did. We can make a new one. And if this one doesn't work for everyone, then we should make a new one. But the earth is already $20 trillion in debt. Who the hell do we owe money to? The Decepticons? What is going on? In all seriousness, oftentimes we are so afraid to change what is that we never dare to ask what can be. Or better yet, what should be. The problem with pursuing our ambitions is that we are often limited by our perceptions of reality and hindered by the limitations of systems that currently exist. Let me give you an example. How do we fit reparations into our existing economy? This is a question I hear a lot. How do we fit reparations into our existing economy? We can't, because the current economy was and is racist. A better question is, how do we create a new economy that allows for reparations and economic justice for all people? That's a better question. How can we afford the Green New Deal when it costs trillions? We can't, but that's a bad question. How can we create a new society in which environmental health is factored into the GDP? Again, that's a better question. How can we afford these refugees in this country when there are so many homeless veterans on the street? That's another terrible question. How can we make an economy that is not dependent on warfare to thrive and that has safety net programs for all people? Better yet, how can we take care of those that are victims of our American interference that destabilized these economies in the first place, thus causing them to be refugees? And more importantly, how can we look ourselves in the mirror if we continue to submit to a tyrant that has locked kids in fucking cages? Those are better questions. You see, the two most dangerous words to tyrants and injustice are what if. Be brave enough to forge them and wield them often, knowing that the God of the oppressed, the spirit of the lowly, the universe that binds all things, whatever language you choose, dare I say the divine chain breaker, is with our every step of the way. And until next week, may the peace of the Lord Christ go with you wherever it may send you. May it guide you through the wilderness and protect you through the storms. May it bring you home rejoicing at the wonders that it shows you. And may it bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. Grace and peace to you.